Good morning. I'm going to call to order the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee. I'm Councilwoman Felder Williams, joined by Councilwoman Pastor and Councilwoman Gallego, and I understand Councilman Gates is on the phone. So I believe there is a change to the minutes.
Yes. Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. In the packet that was sent out to you over the weekend, there was an error in the minutes. The packets that are in front of you have corrected that error, but on the call to the public, Howard May had come in and discussed the lighting at bus stops across the city and suggested an audit. The clarification in the revised minutes would be that the audit he suggested would be to the Next Ride bus ID program. And so the packet that you have in front of you includes that revision.
Okay. So may I have a motion on amended minutes?
Move approval as amended.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? I am going to take out of order public comment because we have a gentleman here that wishes to speak and he needs to leave. Marker Smith. You're on.
Okay. Hi, my name is Marcus Schmidt. I live in the city of Phoenix, and I wanted to make some comments about the proposals that are on the table about how Move Phoenix funds are going to be spent and explicitly how that's going to affect light rail. I am a daily user of light rail to get back and forth to work. In fact, it's to work where I need to go after I make my comments, a full-time employee, and contributing to the community. Anyway, the Phoenix voters voted very clearly that they support Move Phoenix, and with that, they support public transportation, and light rail is becoming an integral part of that. And I find it really perplexing that when the more funds are coming in to public transportation, that there's even any conversation about scaling back and delaying the expansion of light rail. That should not happen, and that would be a violation of public trust, which could have dire consequences on future proposals for public transportation or any tax increases that the public would vote on. The public knows and the committee knows that light rail is good for the community. It keeps cars off the streets, and the community is using it. 50% more ridership than what was projected. It connects students with their classrooms, and it expands the freedom of lower income people and disabled people, of which I am one, as I am fully blind. And it spurs on economic development. So I urge the committee here to not put forth any proposals that would scale back on the light rail expansions or delay their expansions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marvin, would you like to?
Good morning, members of City Council. My name is Marvin Rochelle. Most of you know me for a lot of years. I'm a little bit unhappy this morning. I took a ride in from where I live, got on the 10 at the 101 coming eastbound. It took me 47 minutes to get to the downtown exit. We need to do the light rail the way it was promised to us in the beginning, and I worked on it for 17 years to get it. The light rail was originally promised to us in 2016, complete to 79th Avenue. Now they have revised it that it'll only go to the state capitol in 2023 and not out to the West Valley until 2030. Of course, unfortunately, I won't be here to fight that battle. That's I'll be over 100 at that point. But
I wouldn't doubt that you're still here.
I honestly feel that we're getting the short end of the stick in the West Valley, and a lot of people take that West Valley in. I've recommended for the last 4 years that we do a double HOV lane, dirty word, toll road. But if people think it out, they'll find out that they save 45 minutes time driving, and their time is worth money. They save money on fuel, and they keep down the pollution to our area, and it would be a safer, better ride in with less smog. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have for public comment. Is anyone else? Here. We will go to items 3 and 4. Both are for information. Does anyone have any questions?
Nope.
All right, hearing none, we will go to item 5. Energy saving light emitting diode, LED.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this item today is to talk about the conversion of street lights and park lights to LEDs, which is seen as a sustainability and energy saving project. Here to talk about the LED today is Ray Dovalina from the Street Transportation Department and Charlene Reynolds, and with them is Inger Erickson from the Parks Department. They're going to talk to you about the request for proposals process that we're requesting authorization from you today to issue. It's actually a reissuance of that RFP to get some proposals for the replacement of the LED street lights and park lights. With that, I will turn it over to Ray Dovalina to get into more detail.
Thank you, Mario. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. We also have our consultant, Barbara Schwab, that's been helping us on this development of this proposal or the procurement process. So just to start off, this proposal that we have here is actually meeting also the city's goals for sustainability. And so we're trying to meet those goals in partnership with the overall city's aspect of what we're trying to meet. So kind of starting off on what we're looking at is last year in the spring, we actually started this procurement process. And at the time, there were some things that have changed. Some technological improvements were done after we already had set our standards for streetlights. And looking at that, we saw another opportunity with some other concerns that were brought up about just the light exposure and the type of light that we were using. So with that, we said, well, let's look at kind of re-looking at how we're going to be approaching our LED procurement. And one thing to note, this procurement, we're looking at basically a plug and play. We're looking at a fixture that would be included, basically replacing the fixture that you already have in the street network that we have. And in addition, as Mario mentioned, we're also collaborating with parks as well. And here to kind of just talk about a little bit of parks is Inger, and I'll just keep it.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, as Ray mentioned, in collaboration with the Streets Department, in order to see if we can get a best price point for lights, for LED lights, we are going to partner with them on this RFP. We have a need for area lights, lights that light up our parking lots, the walking paths, things of that nature. Over the life of the time that we would need this, about 5,000 lights, up to 5,000 lights we could be replacing. We also need poles because we usually replace the poles and the lights at the same time, and so that would be, again, part of this RFP, primarily because where we put our lights, sprinklers hit them, and so sometimes the poles are degraded at that point. We need to replace them. So we will be in concert with the Streets Department putting this RFP out to make sure that we can get the best price point for our lights.
Thanks, Inger. So kind of moving on, one of the questions that was brought up was, what is Kelvin? What is the heat color temperature that we had originally looked at? And the original procurement, we were looking at 4,000. So there's been a lot of questions, a lot of concerns about what type of Kelvin use that we're going to use for these types of lights. So right now, we do have, our standard is 4,000 Kelvin. We have a little bit over 1,000 lights that we've been putting in with city funds to put our LED lights, as well as some of the development aspects that continue on with the city of Phoenix, with the private development community. And so this just shows what the color heat temperature we have across the Kelvin scale. And as you can see, the lower the Kelvin, the more yellowish the light. And currently our lights right now, we have a high pressure sodium light fixture across the whole city that basically is around the 3,000 Kelvin. And so what we're looking at is more in the whiter type of light, around 4,000. And also to note that the lower the Kelvin, based on the manufacturing companies, we've been told that the lower the Kelvin, there's more energy use that is needed for that type of Kelvin, and then the higher the Kelvin, the less energy use that is needed for that type of light. So kind of moving on for some of the RFP options. First, we've broadened the performance aspect of the procurement. So we did have a pretty tighter, it was a tighter specification that we had last year, and we've broadened the performance specification to make sure that we can capture more companies to be able to apply for this procurement. In addition, we're also looking at because of the concerns that have been brought up by the community, we're looking at a 3,000 and a 4,000 Kelvin to look at what are the energy uses, what are the costs associated with that, and what would be the best thing for the city in moving forward with those types of different types of lights that we could consider. So this was an addition thing that we did for the procurement of this. Also, we've done some surveys, some public surveys, very limited. We actually went out to Lindo Park neighborhood, and we actually put out a couple of lights out there. We didn't tell the community what the light is. We just said there's two different types. Can you provide us some input? We've gotten kind of low. We've gotten low responses, but we're going to work towards getting a broader survey across the city and working with our manufacturing companies to see if we can get some of those lights that differ between 3,000 and 4,000 and see how we can move ahead and do a broader citywide public survey for that.
Are you going to do that prior to putting this out?
Madam Chair, we're going to be working towards the same time frame as this, as the procurement process. So I think it's working. We haven't gone out and asked this to the manufacturing companies, but we're going to be working with the manufacturing companies to see if we can get that included and see if we can do a couple of lights across the city.
I have a concern about that, because why would we do that simultaneously? And we have, I guess, I answer my own question right now, in the sense of if we did it simultaneously, we don't know what the results are going to be. And it may be, but we're only putting up a 3,000, 4,000, right? Example?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, yes, I mean, we will be looking at a 3,000 and 4,000 light.
So is there a possibility to do a 3,500 Kelvin?
Madam Chair, if I may, just a couple of things on the survey. The idea is that the survey would be done simultaneously as the RFP to get feedback on both Kelvin levels. At the same time, in the RFP, we'll be asking for both Kelvin levels. And in response to your question, Councilwoman Pastor, about having a 3,500, that is something that we could also include in the RFP to ask for that level as well. But in the conversations that we've had with the manufacturers that we've been involved with, the 3,500 level isn't available in the streetlights, but it's something that we could ask for in the RFP.
But it's not available.
It's not immediately available to install for the purpose of a survey
Oh,
right
okay,
now.
I got it. But 3,500 is available.
3,500 may be
limited.
available. It may have to be a custom solution
Oh,
for
okay.
the street lighting.
Okay, got it. Okay, I was just, because I was listening.
Ray, let
Yes,
me
ma'am.
ask one more question
Yes,
on that.
Madam Chair.
If you're doing that simultaneously, your RFP is out, and are you asking for them to give you options? I mean, it sounds like to me you're running a test, you're going to come up with this is what we want. In the meantime, you put out an RFP that's very flexible, and I don't know how people know how to respond, and I'm very concerned about that.
Madam Chair, we do have, like I said, right now, a current survey. The goal would be to try to get some additional information. We do know that there's considerations to look at the type of light. This hasn't been done, across the city, and it's been limited across the Southwest. So we're trying to at least get some information right now from the public to try to gauge that. We do have that area in Lindo Park area that we could use, continue to use, and try to work with the neighborhood associations, the HOAs, try to get that inclusive for this process that we're doing. We can get into the schedule of the procurement also further in the presentation, but we can talk about that.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, I think the intent, because we're also doing a survey in the parks at Mountain View Park, and I think the intent is to get the feedback, and at the end of the RFP period, would have the feedback, and so that would help us make our decision on, is it 3,000 or 4,000 that we need to go with based on feedback, based on price point, those various things. And I think, again, if we run it concurrently, we at least have that information at the end, and the survey would have to end before the RFP was back, so that we didn't have something that really tainted our view. We would end the survey, and then at that point, the RFP would be opened, and then we would use the two together in concert. One thing would not make the total determination, but it would be the whole package.
I understand that much, Inga. What I'm questioning is, will the RFP include language saying you are doing a survey within those categories that allows the respondent to judge or give you
And
adequate information
Yeah.
so
They will
that
bid
they're
on both.
eligible?
They will bid on both pieces.
Yes, Madam Chair, just to clarification, we are doing the survey, and we would be working with different manufacturers. At the same time, we're doing the procurement, and the procurement would have a option for a 3,000 and a 4,000. They do have, and I'll go into more in the specifics, but they do have a public outreach for implementation if and when we get to the point of moving forward with the construction, the implementation of the streetlight. So there's two separate things. We are currently doing a survey in the Lindo Park with our city staff and working with our manufacturing. And then we would work with other manufacturers to look at if we can get a couple of more lights and put them across the city and get that survey through the city of Phoenix.
I understand that.
Madam Chair, if I may just jump in, the RFP will only provide us with information about the cost point. So the cost of if there's a cost difference in the light fixtures at the 3,000 level and at the 4,000 level, and if the council desires at the 3,500 level as well. We would also get information about what the differences are in each type of product in the energy savings. So we can see for each product, are there differences between the 3,000, the 3,500, and the 4,000, so that we can provide that information to the city council. In addition, at the same time, we would do this survey to get some feedback from the community on their preferences, so that we can provide that information to the council for a policy discussion about this. So if the council desires at that point, you would have that information at hand, the community input, the price information, the energy savings information, all that would be available for a larger discussion on what level of Kelvin should be used and going forward and implementing these lights.
Okay, let me ask. You are talking about the purchase of the lights as comparison for the cost, not the operation. The cost savings are going to be over time, because I don't think the parks or anything are metered separately, are they?
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, each park has an individual meter for that particular park.
Oh,
But it
okay.
includes the ball field lights and all the various lights and all the electricity to run the irrigation system. So we wouldn't necessarily know what the light specifically was, but we would have a good idea if it dropped dramatically that it was because of the lights.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next item is the solar option, and I know, Madam Chair, we've had those discussions in the past. So I wanted to give you some examples of what we've done in the last 6 to 7 years. The one on the bottom left actually it's along Galvin Parkway at the entrance of Phoenix Zoo, and it's actually for there's a roundabout there, and so we put those working with parks. It was a capital improvement project. And this shows basically a solar light. It's a one component variable components that are integrated within one street light. And so you see a panel on the top, you see a battery pack just below the street light. So that kind of encompasses a whole street light that is solar. And so this is an application that we did in 2009. The one in the middle is actually one that we just implemented at South Mountain at Elliott Road and 25th Drive. We had been getting a lot of concerns next to the mountain, the south of the mountain, or South Mountain Park, about issues on, just dead end areas where there's some issues there. And so we've implemented this type of light fixture and pole. And as you can see, that you have the light fixture. They don't have a panel, but they have a actual wrap. That's the cylinder that you see on the top. And so as you can see, it's a whole component that's tied together as one complete street light. And then the far right light is one that we've implemented a couple of years ago in 2013. It's at Fifth Avenue. It's a city parking lot just south of Fillmore. And we've implemented those there. And that, as you can see, it's basically a solar wrap all the way up to the street light, the mast arm of the street light, and the bottom is the battery pack aspect of it. So these types of lights basically range from the left to the right. We're looking at $7,500 per light at the Galvin Parkway location. We spent about $5,000 for the one in the middle, and then looking at $10,000 a piece for the one on the far right. So wanted to make sure that you were aware of how we're looking at some of these solar aspects or solar components and technology to see how we can integrate that in our program. At this time, we are looking at about, for just a streetlight fixture, we're looking at it between $200 and $400 each. So if when you start comparing the facility and the components that you have as compared to just the lights fixture, there's a greater cost differential between those two. So wanted to make sure you're aware of what we've been looking at and what we've been doing. Yes.
So I commend you to looking at that, and I commend the fact that I think there was a charge before I was on council about lowering energy usage, reducing costs, and a number of dynamics before I entered council. And it was I think that's great. However, as we move forward and we are determining in the present time what the future is going to look like with our lighting, I think that conversation really needs to be had. I keep hearing energy savings, cost savings. I hear that language, and because of that language, this is why we are looking at these things. I truly believe that there should be all types of options and all types of determination as to do we want to go solar? Is it going to cost a little bit more? What's it going to cost? Do we want to do a mixed use type of solar here, LED over here? What will that look like in the future? And so I strongly feel that it is our responsibility as council to determine those, make those decisions. We have all the research and all the dynamics of what could happen and how would we do this, or how would this look like. So I'm hearing, it says research by consultant staff will continue to explore. When are you going to explore? Because right now we're getting ready to write an RFP, and I would like to know what it looks like with solar, what it looks like with LED, whatever else, what it looks like with, well, I can't remember the term, a dimmer, all these things as we go out in an RFP so that we know what the costs will look like.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, as we continue on with looking at these options, we are considering a solar option to look at seeing what the vendors could provide, just because it's a little bit different than what we're doing right now with the fixture itself. So we are going to consider an option for the type of solar light. One of the things that we're looking at is what are the components that tie in the solar, because we have the street light, we have the pole, we have variable components that make up the street light, as well as we're also on lease poles with SRP and APS. So what are those components? Because we don't own all the pole. It's basically a pole that's owned by APS and SRP. What is the material? So we're going to look at crafting an option to look at what if we could put in some solar lights. What would be the cost? What type of specification that would be to include an option for this for the procurement.
On the RFP that you're putting out, I guess your intention is to purchase enough bulbs to cover the entire city?
Yes.
And when do you expect, or how long do you think it will take for the conversion?
Let me, Madam Chair, let me get into the schedule, and we'll kind of tail off on that as well. So, looking at the procurement schedule right now, we are looking at proposals going out in March. Through that, getting proposals in by end of April. Looking at best and final offers based on that procurement, and then looking at a panel evaluation where the recommendation back to the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee, and then moving forward for a recommendation in the fall. Given that, we would be looking at a 2 to 3 year program to implement. We have 90,000 lights, so we'd be looking at about a 2 to 3 year implementation program that can be shortened up based on what the vendor, the developer comes in and provides their schedule. But we're looking at about an 18 to 30 month time duration for implementation of this program.
One of the reasons I'm asking that is following up on her question to you, is because if you're studying solar and there's a potential to put solar in, why would you make the expense of converting at this point and turn around and take it out and put solar in?
Madam Chair, if I may, this is something that we did spend considerable time discussing because we wanted to make sure that we have all the information and on options available to the subcommittee and to the council moving forward. The components of the streetlight, if you look, the way I understand it is the streetlight is one unit. The light fixtures that we're replacing for the LEDs are actually separate from the other components that are built into the solar, which is the power source. So as Ray discussed, there are many options for providing that solar power to the streetlights. One would be a panel up on top of the light. Another is built into the pole itself, or a wrap on the pole. And there are potentially other options as well. And those can be evaluated independently of the street lights and don't need to necessarily be done at the same time. So what we'll recommend is that we could move forward with a separate process to evaluate the solar options. I would recommend that we start with a request for information and build from the information that we get from the vendors that respond to the request for information, and develop a procurement for additional solar options. But it's something that really, because they're totally separate functions and components on the street light, don't need to go and happen at the same time, and we can evaluate independently.
Could you go back to your slide?
Yeah.
Right there. So my understanding is, the third one is a new pole.
Yes.
Okay. So, and then the middle one is I think a fair new pole because it's the packs there. So the option that we would probably only have would be to the left, because that's an old pole and it has the panel at the top. Or is it a new pole?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, actually it was a new pole. It was a complete pole with that package that we bought for the LED street light.
Okay, so I think I'm getting confused with the option. And what I mean by that is, why wouldn't we look at in a very holistic way, what our options are with this RFP? Because I feel like, and I'm gonna be a constituent today, right now. I feel like this has to do with the streets, where we take a street, we pull it apart, we go do what we have to do, we seal it, then something else happens and we go to the same street. And I'm just trying to get a feel of the option piece, because I'm not understanding the option piece. in the sense of I'm visualizing, and you guys can clear this up for me. I'm visualizing we go and light 90,000 plus 5,000 in our city park, so 95,000 lights. We make this decision, and then next year or a year and a half, we say, oh, well, we want to try solar now, and we can try it, and we already know that it's going to take 3 poles, brand new poles. What's that cost going to be? And then we start looking at our poles, probably our older poles, and decide to then replace them.
Councilman, I agree with you. I think if we're talking about
We need to be clear about.
having to replace the fixtures that we just purchased in order to install solar, that would not be the right way to go about this. And so my understanding was that solar solutions could be done separately from the light fixtures. However, we will take a look at adding an option into this RFP to see what information we can get. The challenge is, because there are so many moving parts and pieces to the RFP that we're talking about, with the varying Kelvin levels and on all the other pieces, we just want to make sure that we have proposals that can be fairly evaluated, and don't have too many variables that make it too difficult to evaluate from one to the next. But we can look at that as an option just to get information. And so I think that piece about getting information about the solar that can tie into the LED, there's a way that we can build that in.
Councilwoman?
I represent one of our mountain districts, and so an area where solar might make more sense because of the cost of moving conduit and trenching. And so in the case of the Elliott streetlight, that was in my district, and we spent a lot of time trying to find the right solution for that. It was a community who originally wanted a very dark environment, and then due to public safety concerns, decided they wanted to add lighting after the fact. And it was very helpful to have solar as an option, because we would have had to do a lot of trenching, and it would be quite an expensive project for one streetlight. And so solar did make sense for us in that area, but I don't know that a mass deployment would have made sense. It was one streetlight. And so I think it's good that we have the solar option, and I think it won't dominate the RFP process, but maybe having some of those tools in our toolkit outside of the RFP process does make sense, because we have such a diverse city with so many different characteristics and challenges that sometimes one RFP cannot address everything.
And Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, if I might, in parks where we have remote locations like you were discussing, we have put solar in as that option because, again, of the expense to run the conduit. Apache Wash Trailhead, for example, is the place where we have done it most recently, because there was no way to get electricity out there and to have a light, and so the application there was solar.
Okay, just moving on with the proposal scoring. Oh,
Oh,
Chair.
Councilman?
Sir.
Thank you. Just while we were on that solar piece,
Yeah.
so I was looking at the right, now I have the benefit of seeing this, sorry, I was on the phone for the beginning. But the wrap here, is that just intended, and I know this is sort of theoretical, it's not a specific proposal, but is that wrap just to provide the power to illuminate the light, or is that actually to generate additional power that could go into the grid? What's your think when we talk? Because to me, that completely changes the analysis.
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, to our understanding, the Innovis type of streetlight that you see there with the wrap is actually for the electricity of the light, and it's limited to that.
Thank you.
Change the cost, too.
So moving forward with the proposal scoring, this is the overall scoring points that we have. We have a total of 1,000 points. We're focused on looking at the life cycle cost of installation. We're focused on the quality of light and what would be the overall operations and maintenance, and trying to make sure that we have a good quality of light for the purposes that we need. And also corporate experience, looking at the companies that they're going to be submitting for this procurement. What are the experience that they have in regards to putting LED lights in a mass production across the community. And we're looking at least 10,000 LED lights for those companies that they're going to be submitting to have that experience, at least 10,000 lights. So with that, we're asking the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee to recommend to City Council for approval to release the RFP for the LED streetlight and park light conversion.
Ray, I know that you've been contacted, and I think all of us have been contacted about the company. And I don't know if it's the only company that comes in and does this at their cost and then gets repaid from the savings.
Yes, ma'am.
Does RFP allow them to bid in any way for this?
Madam Chair, well, what we've looked at, and from last year's to this year, we are actually broadening the performance specifications to make sure that we can capture appropriate, more appropriate vendors for this. So, not knowing exactly what that specification that particular vendor has, we've done our effort to make sure that we've broadened that specification to make sure that we have a lot more inclusion of some of these manufacturing companies, and so that's what we're doing.
For cost, if they're saying it would be recoup of savings, would that meet your point system?
You want to answer? I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, the current RFP, it's in draft form right now. It does not at this time have a component whereby a proposed vendor could come in and basically partner with the city and be paid through the savings that are captured by utilizing lower energy. That's something that we can certainly look at. The way that the RFP is structured is that the city would purchase all the lights from the vendors, and then the city would capture all the savings that were brought about by the conversion of this program.
Councilman Gates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, my perception was that one of the weaknesses of the previous RFP that it didn't have this option. So, I think we should be looking at, since we're at the RFP stage here, if someone can come forward with a proposal that makes sense for the taxpayers, where the proposer actually owns it and the city doesn't own it, I think that ought to at least be part of the RFP.
Any other comments? Okay. Is that the end of your presentation?
ma'am.
I do have some cards. Cynthia Malecki?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. I so appreciate your, am I supposed to go like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I so appreciate your comments. I know that I've had a lot of discussion with staff and with council about LED lights. I am not against LED lights. 3,000 Kelvin versus 4,000. So today I'm going to talk about how the white lights fit into our community. And I specifically say our community because it feels, I feel like there's nothing said about Skyglow, how it's going to affect Tucson, who did go with 3,000, right? Tucson went with 3,000, or Flagstaff, or Sedona, or the people who like to look at the stars. In my community, my house, the back is on 35th Avenue, the front is on 36th Drive. I don't want to live in a community that looks like a POW camp or a state prison. Now, the National Wildlife Association, 80 years old, has a wonderful article, Nature Smart. Time outdoors can make kids healthier, happier, smarter, and more inclined to conservation. It goes on to talk about the National League of Cities, which I believe Phoenix is a member of, and Children and Nature's Network, that they're trying to connect families to nature. As I walk around the city, I see yards dedicated to wildlife. I see little parks. I see regional parks. I see mountain preserves. If you can prove that 4,000 LED lights is not going to affect the circadian rhythm of all that life, that's time up, then I won't say another word. But one more thing.
In the mic, in the mic, in the mic.
In your surveys, is there any inclusion of the risks that 4,000 LED lights give to health, to children, to the environment, to people like me who have to see at night? If there isn't that information included in the surveys, your surveys are bogus. You need to have full disclosure. Full disclosure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Craig Weaver.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. I've come this morning because I live in Sunny Slope and have enjoyed the valley for a number of decades. I learned about the new park light fixtures being installed a few months ago, and it's been great that the Director of Parks and Recreation has started to do a study to reconsider the light fixtures that have now come to our city and our homes. I'd also like to thank the Director of Street Transportation for taking a second look at this option as well. Some cities have had trouble. We have the opportunity to get to a good solution, and I thank you all for your time in looking at this. The LED fixture I have here in my home is rated at 2700 Kelvin, which is the same subgroup as 3000. So I think in this bid, it would be important to have that subgroup, 2700 to 3000, considered as the soft white fixtures, because some companies like GE may make a 3000 fixture just like this, and other major companies may make a 2700 Kelvin fixture in this same category of soft white. I think most would enjoy seeing the soft white 3000 Kelvin that we now have installed at Mountain View Park, and I hope you'll get out there in the evening and look at it. I hope you'll also look at one stretch where the street lights are in a row on 19th Avenue north of Dunlop, because the other street lights have been scattered all over the valley. It was very hard for me several days to get a communication to the city about one new LED street lights that was problematic. I think it's very hard for people to communicate with you on this. So it's great that you're working towards a plan that will give us all a chance to take a better look at them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have some handouts here that'll include comments by the health communities about going above 3,000. This includes the AMA, and there's a great picture here that will show you that the LEDs are much bluer than our old lights.
Councilman Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Weaver, for your involvement. Just a question for staff. How many lights have we already changed over?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, in the street light realm, we have about 1,400 lights.
Okay, of a total, how many?
90,000 total.
Thank you.
Next is Jim Malecki.
Good morning, Madam Chair, council members. Thank you for the time. First, I would really strongly want to commend the advocates as well as the council members for really being the impetus for the reason why this is being revisited. When we do RFP processes, it's really easy to go apples to apples, let's get our cheapest costs and move forward. And I think what we're seeing here when it comes to the LED lights, 3,000 versus 4,000, solar versus trenched, parks versus streets, you're not comparing apples to apples, you're comparing fruit baskets to fruit baskets, right? I mean, as I'm driving down the street, I may want to have that 27 to 3,000 light because, in fact, I actually see better. The thought that the brighter the light at night, the easier one sees is actually erroneous. But as I'm emulating A.J. Pollock out on the softball fields, I might want to have a brighter light for maybe greater visibility. So I think that I really appreciated that line of thought and that questions regarding what works in this community may not work here, what works on 35th Avenue may not work at Cactus Park in terms of different lights. And I really hope that as we go forward with this RFP process, you're looking for that flexibility. We talked about cost savings, we talked about energy usage a little bit. A lot of that is minimal. The difference between 3,000 and 4,000 is minimal. The quality of life increase, however, is great. It's vast. So I thank you again. And as we move forward, holistically examining the issue, quality of life, I don't know where that sits in that chart of scoring. I saw a lot of costs, but I didn't see quality of life. I didn't see like the anecdotal, kind of the subjective judgments in terms of how to determine best proposals. So maybe some feedback on that in terms of where that's included. I think that deserves a lot of points. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Good timing. Jack Davis?
Good morning, and thank you for addressing this issue. I know that some people may not understand exactly what the Kelvin is. The Kelvin is merely the color. The Kelvin rendering index merely indicates color. It does not indicate beam spread. It does not indicate lumens. I think visiting this as a color rendering index only is not in our best interest. We need to broaden the information base. The fact that you're saying that you're going to only include companies that have so many hours or so many projects that exceed so many units, will those companies be subcontracting to local companies? Is that how that's going to be done? Or is this something that they're going to just do on their own? How is this going to include local business? And how do we assure that local business is a participant in this selection? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Could you answer that for us?
Madam Chair, Charlene Reynolds will answer that one.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, basically, we require 10,000 lights in different types of settings to be installed because this is a citywide application. We wanted to make sure that anyone that was proposing on this project had the skill, had the employees that were knowledgeable, because what we don't want to have happen on a citywide application is for someone to come in without enough experience in the city potentially to go dark. So from an RFP perspective, we will require a minimum number of lights having been installed in a similar application. And what we found during the last RFP, we had 11 respondents. Many of those companies did partner with local firms, so there were opportunities for partnership. At the pre-proposal conference, we provided the names of local companies to the vendors, so they had an opportunity to work with them and would have an opportunity to participate in this project as well.
Questions, comments? Motion? Councilwoman Pastor?
I was going to go ahead. Let me hear your motion.
Yeah.
Let me hear the motion first.
I move that we accept staff recommendation with the addition that we be open in the RFP to vendors who would propose owning the fixtures, and they could be paid from the savings. And also, if it's appropriate, adding as well a separate RFI, I think that was mentioned, with respect to the solar lights that should not be a part of the main RFP.
Do I have a second?
Can I add some stuff to the motion, and then I'll give the second? Sure.
Sure. Yeah. Wait.
Well, it has
yeah,
to do
you
with
can
the
probably
how-
second
it has
it,
to
and
do
then
with-
you can
second.
offer a friendly amendment.
Second. And then I'm going to offer a friendly amendment.
Okay.
Well, I think it's probably already in there, and that's why I want to get some clarity regarding the Calvins on Bow Street and parking lights, that it will include 3,000, possibly 3,500 and 4,000. And I just want to know what the cost and the projected energy use of it would be. Is that going to be part of the RFP?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, yes, we can certainly include that fixture type.
And I think it could be on the option piece regarding the motion sensors. I don't know if you guys know this, but I was asking if when we're here on Washington at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning and there's not a lot of activity, maybe if there could be a motion sensor that would go down to 2,500 Kelvins or 3,000 Kelvins, and then when it got triggered, someone was walking or a car came by, then the lighting would go up to 4,000. So I was very much wanting to know if that's possible and what the savings could be in the option.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, we can certainly add that option, and we won't know until the developers submit, but yeah, we'll get that
Me.
information.
Trying to think for the future and being innovative.
Did you include allowing someone, oh, yes, you did. Never mind.
Yeah.
And Madam Chair as well, on the item that Councilwoman Pastor just raised, would that fall within the value-added services, which is 75 points?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, no, that would not. The option proposed by Councilwoman Pastor would be a separate option. Value added refers to basically anything that enhances their proposal, such as public outreach, how they would notify the community when they would basically be installing the lights. Another proposal that we had seen before is possibly tagging and identifying the street poles, which we currently don't have that available. So it's any other enhancements beyond the scope of the RFP.
Madam Chair, I really like the motion sensor concept, and I think we've heard from other additional bells and whistles. And so I think from what I'm hearing, that doesn't really have any value under this RFP. So I wonder if maybe we could add, some amount of points for that to address these type of innovative ideas. We're going in there anyway. We're changing the fixtures, so why not take advantage of this opportunity for other items? So, maybe just throw out for discussion, maybe you peel 100 points off of these other things and come up with a line that would be 100 for something of that sort.
And I guess I'm not sure that I would want to see the lights turning on and off. I think most of the communities I represent would just like to have the lights on for security reasons, and so I'm not sure I would want to give points for that category.
Turn them off.
No, I'm not turning them off. I'm just, it did, like, when there is no motion, so let me see. At Phoenix College at night, where their main building is, there's lighting. But when there's no activity around that area of the building, then it dims down to a certain point. Still safety, public safety is still always the #1 issue in my mind. And then when there's a sense or someone's there, then it lights up so that they're able to see there's more lighting around that area. And so it's just a motion. It's a motion. It triggers in motion.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, the RFP can be structured two ways. One, we can have a separate option for dimming to determine the cost and the energy usage and savings, and or you could add a separate category. The previous RFP did include options for dimming, and so that was, and we called them enhancements. So we can certainly do that again because that was a factor of the previous RFP, just to determine if the city wanted to add enhancements in the future, we knew what the cost of those would be.
And Madam Chair, another one of those potential enhancements, I think most people would perceive this as an enhancement, would be to add a camera as well, you know, in the parks from a public safety perspective. Those are the types of things that I had in mind. We don't necessarily know what all of those things are until we do the RFP, but it seems to me to give some value to those sorts of enhancements would be a good addition to the RFP scoring.
I take it you are accepting the amended motion?
I am.
Okay.
Second. I'll second my own.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
We will now go to item, I think it's 6, which is the Street Transportation Department 5-year Capital Improvement Program update.
Madam Chair, City Council members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Every year, we come to you and the City Council as well with the capital improvement program of the department, Street Transportation Department. And here with me is Kini Knutson, the Assistant Director and City Engineer, as well as Eileen Yazzie, the Special Projects Administrator over our CIP program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kini.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. First, I was going to talk about what the challenges we have with our CIP. As you well know, as we've talked to this subcommittee frequently in the past, is we have a lot of streets to maintain and to take care of. And so what we have done as looking at our 5,000 miles of streets and how we balance out our CIP, we've set some internal targets and under the direction of Ray of trying to make sure that we spend our money in the most appropriate way to make sure we're both maintaining our assets and also building new assets for our citizens. And so we've broken those up into 5 areas: major transportation projects, major maintenance, technology enhancements, bicycle and pedestrian mobility, and also stormwater projects. So how we have divided those up, and it's really aspirational in nature, but it's to give us guidance, is to look at how we break down our CIP through these different 5 areas. And I'd say that because we have 5,000 miles of streets and they're existing streets, we look to spend about 50% of our CIP on maintaining those existing assets. Then we looked at our mobility, our bicycle and pedestrian mobility improvements that we have to our network, our street network. We look to spend about 15% of that, and obviously that's increasing, trying to over what we've done in the past because of our Complete Streets program or Bicycle Master Plan, and be able to focus more heavily on that. And looking at technology enhancements and using technology to help traffic flow and reduce congestion, we're targeting around 5% of our CIP to be able to be focused in on that. And then I would move to the major transportation projects piece, because 30% of our CIP we would like to target on that, focus on that area. And the one thing about the major transportation projects is that allows us to encompass all of these in some way, shape, or form, because when we're doing major transportation projects, we're able to accomplish maintenance, we're able to address mobility issues, and also to look at technology enhancements as well in the corridors. Finally, our stormwater projects, as we're going to talk about in the next agenda item in this meeting, that we don't have a dedicated funding source for stormwater projects, so that is around about less than 1% of our CIP. We're able to focus in on that based on our given revenue sources.
Yeah,
So if you,
I just have to ask, that comes up to 99.
Stormwater.
No.
You got a -1 there.
No, it's
either a-
approximately 1%. I'm sorry,
Approximately.
Madam Chair.
Oh,
Approximately
so then you
1%.
got 101?
Approximately.
Yeah,
Approximately.
It's rounded.
The key point of that slide is that stormwater is so small, it's like a rounding. Which is a problem.
Which is a problem, because it is a problem within all our districts. Especially.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to
No, good
ask.
catch.
No problem, Madam Chair. It was intentional. And
See
then
where you
if you look at our historical annual CIP budget that we have adopted, you can see that it's generally trended downwards over the last 8 to 9 years. And one thing I point out, even though we have projected an increase for next year for fiscal year 17 of up to $175 million, The key point is this includes about 27 million of Transportation 2050 revenues that are going to be kicking in for a full fiscal year, starting next fiscal year, but it also includes approximately $30 million for the LED program that we just heard previously. So representative of this, if you just look at our existing revenue sources that we have, the CIP is actually going down for next year if you take out both the T2050 and the LED portions of our budget. Now, if you look at from a larger context, our 5-year CIP, our proposed CIP, and this is proposed, and I apologize, looks like we have one category that didn't make it onto the slide there. About $670 million is our CIP for the 5 years proposed. And you'll see the $155 million up there at the top of T2050 revenues, the impact that that new tax that started in January 1st will have on our 5-year CIP. And then you'll also be able to see that we do have federal funding as a large portion, but our major funding sources going forward will be the HERF and the T2050 program in our CIP, 5-year CIP. And if you look at just next year's, you've got major maintenance and major transportation projects. This is by the type, the project type here. About 72% of our CIP for next year is going to be focused on those 2 areas. And then as I mentioned before, we had those breakouts of the 5 areas, and those are aspirational, as I mentioned before. So we're working towards those. We think that's the most responsible split, but obviously on a year-to-year basis, those will vary. But we're trying on a 5-year rolling program to be able to hit those targets as we move forward in redrafting our CIP. To include especially the T2050. The one thing I mentioned is, even though we've plugged in Transportation 2050 in here, we've kind of balanced them out through the 5 areas of the program. But obviously that is up to the mayor and council and the Citizens Transportation Commission to help guide us as we develop the 5-year CIP in using the Transportation 2050 revenues and how those specifically get allocated to either major transportation projects, major maintenance, and mobility and accessibility and improvements to our street network. And this is, again, by the type of project, this is our 5-year CIP, just an expanded look of what the previous slide was on the chart. And now I'll just turn it over to Eileen Yazzie, who will talk a little bit more specifically about our elements of the CIP.
Sure. I'm going to spend this time, Chairwoman Williams and members of the subcommittee, going over and highlighting some of the projects that do fall into the categories that have already currently been identified. So as the previous slide mentioned, our major transportation projects does make up 44% right now of our CIP. And the major transportation projects, these could be widening projects, but also a lot of the elements involved in these projects, particularly with the adoption of Complete Streets policy and our focus in on pedestrian mobility and bicycle mobility and connection to transit, they include those elements. So they may not show up in the 5% of the bicycle mobility projects, but they're actually included as elements of these projects. And some good examples, Avenida Rio Salado, this does include full pedestrian, bike lanes, and bus stop connections as part of both the Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects in our CIP. Another highlight that's happening right now that's currently in design, and we're out in the public working with them, is the Chandler Boulevard project from 19th Avenue to 27th Avenue that's being done in conjunction with the South Mountain Freeway. And then some future projects that are outlined in our CIP that again highlight a major investment in a street is Van Buren from 7th Street to 40th Street. This also highlights the street transportation moving forward with plans. This was part of the Reinvent Phoenix plan. We are moving to actualize this project, and there's also federal aid already associated with the project. And this will include a complete street feel where we do include bike lanes, lighting, landscaping, improved sidewalks, and street connections. The major maintenance projects, I know that we've been here last month going over the overlays and how important those are to our life cycle of our streets and really providing a network for all vehicles and people traversing on these. So overall, our major maintenance, it makes up just about 42% of our CIP, and we focus annually throughout the 5 years and looking at the preservation. We're also looking at bridge rehab, maintenance, and inspection to make sure that we're meeting those life cycles. And as well as last month, I know with T2050 and looking forward for that fiscal year 2016 and that approval through council, T2050 can provide an up to 60% increase of our maintenance cycles. And pedestrian and bicycle mobility, right now, again, the target is running kind of the hard numbers. It says it makes up 5% of our CIP, but when we actually take in those major transportation projects, it equates to, it equals more. Some highlights of these projects is completing right now in 2016 is the Rio Salado Pathway and Roosevelt Street. Roosevelt Street will then be kind of fully landscaped, complete from bicycle pedestrian mobility all the way from First Avenue or Central Avenue all the way to 7th Street. Another one that's highlighted in here is Grand Canalscape, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. Essentially, with the partnership of the federal government of our Tiger Grant, for both Phase 1 and Phase 2, there will be 10 miles of completed pathway from the I-17 freeway all the way to the Tempe-Phoenix border. And then as well to also mention too, it's noted as upcoming every year, it's noted that the grid bicycle bike share expansion, we are leveraging federal aid in both 2016, 18, and 2020 from our partners at MAG to support our regional bike share system. Technology enhancements, a lot of people in the industry will use the word or the term ITS, information technology systems, and this really focuses on improving our operations and efficiencies for traffic and addressing incident management and major events. Some highlights of what we're looking to do in the next 5 years is continuing with our signal system upgrades, and that's kind of our asset management plan and making sure everything is working as it should and replacing them as needed. And the other one is the downtown traffic management system upgrade. This really relates to our special events and our major events that happen here in downtown. How are we addressing them, and what's the best technology to get people in and out of downtown via car, light rail, and working all together on that. Sonoran Ring is also a large one. This is happening in the most northern part of our city right now. There's 19 miles right now that are not connected to our system. With this implementation of this, and it's also federally funded by our partners, we're looking again to connect those streets and those systems into our system so we can optimize our traffic signals and the flow of traffic in the northern area.
Madam Chair, just back on that last slide, the illuminated street name signs. We have street name signs all around the city that, no offense, I know, you guys haven't had the money, but they look terrible. It's a blight condition. And so to see that as future, not even on, and now I did see in the text here, there was efforts to try and address that. But again, there's a lot of money in T2050, and if there's any way to accelerate or even target those, it seems to me that it's, I don't know, I've observed that the southern facing signs make some sense, look particularly bad. If there's anything, and this is all over the city, I see this all over the city. Those are nice signs, and it's a shame to have them really, they look like a blight on our own traffic signal. So I would support any efforts to try and move some funding towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. So the stormwater projects, I'll highlight some of the big ones that are happening, and you'll hear a lot about this item, particularly related to the funding and our overwhelming needs in the next presentation. So you'll see in 2016 to 17, it looks like a lot of projects. We are always continuing to leverage our partnerships, particularly with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, and the 16 to 17 highlights us leveraging those funds as well as with expending what we currently have in the pipeline for funding stormwater projects. Where we see the drop off is when we run out of funding due to I'll get into the next slide too, the revenue streams that are decreasing to support those, as well as you'll hear a lot in the next presentation about the lack of bonds or sufficient revenue stream to support these types of projects. And please note, when it comes to our local drainage solutions that are here, right now, our current database, we have 750 noted locations that need help. We are not able to, we can maybe get through less than a dozen of these per year, And again, that's even leveraging our partnerships with funding at Flood Control District. So I think this also, again, this is a slide to kind of reflect on is where are we with revenues? What are our options or opportunities? So with our HURF, our Highway User Revenue Funds, this fund tends to be decreasing and or stagnant. And this is based off of a gas. This is our Highway User Revenue Funds. And that's mainly due to we have increasing in fuel efficiencies. We have alternative modes of transportation. Our green cars, our electric cars, as well as too, the legislature historically for I think about 5 or so years have been rating this fund to supplant other functions in the state. As well as another one, our Capital Construction Fund, as part of that, due to wireless technologies, we are losing funding sources in that, and that has been supporting stormwater projects as well, and that has drastically declined. There has been, on the bright side of things, obviously we have T2050. Last month, the team up here, we were at the Citizens Transportation Commission laying out ideas, options, data considerations, and we are coming back in March to that committee to lay out some options on how to look programmatically at the T2050 fundings. So we will be back here going over those options for a plan and a program. The other thing too is Congress and the the USDOT, they also passed the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation. That's a 5-year authorization bill that did happen in just this past December. So there are possible opportunities there. Right now, the ink is drying and staff is busy kind of to interpretate and provide recommendation on opportunities. So we'll be working very closely with the Maricopa Association of Governments to understand funding opportunities and parameters of those different funding types. So yes, this does conclude our presentation. We'll be happy to answer questions at this time.
I have questions about the bike. I don't know which slide that is.
Sure.
Or it could be the picture one.
Sure.
Where is bike safety included in all this proposal?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, with all of our projects that we're developing through preliminary engineering, through engineering final design, through construction, we're considering those aspects of safety, and there's aspects to looking at operating costs on how we go back and look at safety options and working with the communities. There's also a lot of educational aspects that we do with the community, with bike safety, with the traveling public safety. So we do have those activities not only on the project development side, but also on the operating side.
So the reason why I'm asking this question is because I don't know how it gets to that information. Bike safety gets to my district because District 4 is the #1 bike safety fatality and other items, and District 8 is #2. And so I have great concern about as we move to bicycle mobility, and I have great concern across all our city of bike safety. But I'm remembering from memory of studying the data, and to me that's a #1 issue. And it needs to be, or we need to be informed as to where it's being embedded or what we need to do in order to educate our community, other than just having an event twice a year of talking about bike safety or creating an event for bike safety. This is an ongoing educational piece that needs to happen. All of us have bike safety rodeos, roundups, I don't know, or create things, but it's a once a year item, and it's not necessarily attended by all those that are riding bikes. And so we need to figure out a better plan on how we do that. And I commend you for doing it, but we have to broaden.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, that's a great point. As we look at some of the larger goals of Transportation 2050 to expand bicycle lanes by 1,000 miles, you're going to see more. We're going to see more bicycles. We're going to see more pedestrians within our right of way. It's just going to be the nature of how we move. And so embedded within our CIP, the Bicycle Master Plan projects will be infrastructure investments to improve safety. But we have parallel to this, obviously, our operating budget where we carry a lot of the bicycle safety programs, and we do leverage funding from the regional side and from the federal side to be able to support those bike safety programs. But I do think that is a great point to be able to see how we can double down on those investments too, as bicycling becomes more and more how we do things and involving all traffic within our roadways to increase our safety programs.
Thank you. Agree with Councilwoman Pastor's call for more investments in multiple different moments of mobility, but we have come a long way. Before being elected to the Phoenix City Council, I served on the Phoenix Environmental Quality Commission, and we had a presentation where the city came in and said, we're spending $30,000 on planning for bicycling. So we have come a long way from those days where it really is part of the table and specifically called out in key presentations, $31 million in the 2017 to 2021 CIP program. So there's certainly a lot to do to make our community safer, but we took a major step forward with the Grand Canal this year, $10 million for investment, and a lot of that will go to safer street crossings in an area with very high levels of bicycle automotive accidents. It's also exciting that this is the first time ever we've had a Tiger Grant in the CIP, so the federal government is stepping up and being a partner. And boy, do we need it. It really has been difficult to see the funding from the state decline. I don't know why we don't see that infrastructure leads to jobs and economic growth. So I wish the state would stop funding the Department of Public Safety with infrastructure dollars. And I know that our partners in the private industry have been stepping up to try to educate our partners at the legislature about what it means if we can make these investments. We have so many projects that will happen as soon as there's funding on the government side for infrastructure. I think in both Council District 1 and 3 along the I-17 corridor, stormwater issues are a big issue. Some of that needs to come from ADOT, and we also need Maricopa County solutions to make those projects go forward. A lot of the land that is not developed in our community is because of stormwater issues, and we have great infill opportunities, get people close to the wonderful resources they love in the city of Phoenix when we invest in infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to finding collaborative solutions to those issues. One opportunity that's very exciting for those of us in District 7 and 8 is the Loop 202 coming in the Levine area. And so could you speak to the city's portion of construction? Obviously, ADOT will be building the freeway, but we have a lot of the needs leading up to the freeway, and are we ready?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Gallego, we continuously we're working with ADOT and their success in moving forward with that project. My understanding is that they will be coming out with a final recommendation of the selected developer, I believe next month, this month.
End of this month.
End of this month, and they will have the price component on that. They are looking at starting the design of that project, the 22-mile project, this year. Sometime on the fall or late of this year, they'll start construction of that project, and they anticipate for the entire corridor, the 22 miles, to be completed sometime in late the 19 or 20, so 2019 or early 2020.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation, and I think you're up next.
Yeah, another one.
Stormwater infrastructure.
Oh.
Oh, I sure do. I'm sorry. Thank you. Diane?
Thank you, Chairman Williams and Transportation Subcommittee. My name's Diane Barker. I reside in Phoenix in District 7, and I have 2 points specific on streets. One in general about how the greater Phoenix streets really are either to help the move people, less congestion and pollution, which is really I'm not on any employment of anybody to be paid to say what I say here. I am for the big picture in our region, the MAG region, which Phoenix is in, and then I'll have a specific request on the streets. The item is that in going to MAG, the state, the city meetings, I see that people are working their job, but may not necessarily be in the big picture of what I'm looking. I am trying to help the most vulnerable population, children and older people, from getting what I experienced in my family, asthma, and it's a terrible thing to get your breath. Now, with these streets, I can see that the big thing is that most of your accidents are on arterial streets. They cut down, they make traffic problems. Ms. Yahtzee is very familiar with the money that can be expended because she worked in MAG, and I don't see any project where we're working like the Hallmark project in Denver, where they use multimodal with transit and the freeways. We have a big bottleneck, of which Council Williams, I've asked MAG to put that on for another review at I-17 and I-10, that bottleneck. I'm being met with, it's already being done. And then when Eric Anderson is out at the state transportation meeting, he talks about everybody like him goes by his car down. Then he speaks of light rail, and he never mentions using the bus. Now, we're supposed to have multimodal, and I want the integration in this area for all of the modes. There's talk now that maybe we won't be giving our federal dollars in the future if we have Congress people that want to give it back to the states because they believe the states are best for handling transportation. So this is my endeavor. I'd like to have your support because I'm getting some bottlenecks with government to say, oh no, we're just doing this. As a citizen, I want this. And if you know anybody that's doing this more than me, I'd be a pleasure for me to meet. I will ask you on the $29 million that's given to streets, what's happening now with transit bonds since it's being taken out of T50? If it's taken out of the contingency money for transit, that's what I understand is to support the bonds rating, and I'd like to have staff get back with me, and I won't need to speak of public information now. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica Goddard?
Madam Chair and council members, I'm Monica Goddard. I live at 5th Avenue in Roosevelt in the Roosevelt District. I'm following up on the 3rd and 5th Avenue changes to two-way streets that we've spoken on before. I wanted to make sure that you had submitted to you a petition from 90 members in the neighborhood against the change. I know that there are some reasons for the change, but most of us are against it. We are not an ingress and egress neighborhood. We are a historic neighborhood with homes and families. One of the things I'm concerned about is we haven't gotten a lot of feedback. We all attended meetings in October, and the staff was supposed to get back to us. I know they're busy with a lot of budget issues, but I'd like to see what came out of those meetings and what the next step is in this and be informed about that. On another matter, congratulations on the bike and pedestrian paths. My teenager and the ones on our block don't care if they have their licenses. They use Metro, they use bicycles, and they're downtowners all the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll submit this to you, please.
Thank you.
90 names.
Sharon Beebe?
Good morning. My name is Sharon Beebe, and I live in the Roosevelt area, and I live at 5th Avenue in Portland. I talked at the last meeting concerning Kenilworth Elementary School, and I didn't know if anybody had contacted the school and if there was any input on the traffic going north on 5th Avenue. The reason that there is a problem with the traffic going north, which was stated many years ago that it would never go north to Kenilworth School, is because of the tunnel. They put an off-ramp in, an on-ramp and an off-ramp. And with the cars coming off of the off-ramp, a lot of them are going straight across and going north on 3rd Avenue. If they come off now and they can go north on Fifth Avenue, how will it impact the school? Have there been studies made to find out what will happen to the school, and have they been contacted? I don't know if I can ask a question of that, but I haven't received any information if it has been answered.
I'll ask staff to follow up with you.
All right?
Yeah, and actually, Madam Chair, my understanding was there were discussions going on with Ruth Ann Marston, and
Yeah.
I had received that feedback because Ms. Beebe had contacted our office, so.
But I've not heard a result.
What's that? Yeah.
Yeah, a decision, so.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we'll follow up with
Okay.
the resident.
I would appreciate that, and I'm sure the school would appreciate that also. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Howard May.
Good morning, members of the subcommittee. I applaud streets on the bike pass initiatives, including Grand Canal. However, there are a few things, though. You have other canals that should be also be following the standard that you put on that canal. For one of the things that I suggested, that I was going to suggest, and I contacted the department about, is a curb along bike paths on those that do not have them, so bikes do not accidentally fall into the gravel or into the canal. And there are several spots in the city where there could be major improvements, including sidewalks in different various parts of the town. I've contacted staff about 16th Street in Glendale already. One of my main concerns is you guys put in the bike grids, and I applaud you for the bike grid system. It's a good program. However, I'm concerned about the blind community and them accidentally walking into them in spots where they're coming off the light rail onto the sidewalk. One of those instances is at Osborne and at McDowell, where they're really close to the sidewalk and there's no curb or little wall from the regular sidewalk to the bike racks. And there's other obstacles in the cities like fire hydrants in the middle of sidewalks and having to walk past a hydrant to get to a push button. I would like staff to follow up with me later on. Thanks.
Thank you. Reed Butler.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Just a brief comment on the work we've been doing out in Levine with the staff, and thank you, Councilwoman Gallego, for bringing up that comment. Just a reminder, of course, this freeway is a 22-mile freeway, $2 billion project, fully funded, and fully funded by the state and the federal government. So it's one of these very important economic development pieces for the city of Phoenix. And my comment, we've been working with Mario Paniagua, Ray, Keeney, Eileen, and others in lots of your departments to coordinate as best as possible the local infrastructure that's going to come in to support the $2 billion freeway. Because this corridor, which I think has been planned, Ray, for 25 years maybe, this corridor will create all kinds of opportunities in Levine, in that area of Phoenix, as well as other areas, to open up some of the services and other economic development. But we need the local infrastructure. So this next 5-year CIP and maybe the 5-year CIP after that, if it can run in tandem with the work ADOT is doing, we think it's a pretty important time to do as much planning as possible and try to leverage off of the state and Fed money to benefit our local communities. But mainly I wanted to say thank you to the staff. They put a lot of time and effort into this coordination over the last number of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe that's all the cards I have on this item. So we will go to the next stormwater infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Chair and City Council members of the committee. We're going to talk about the rounding error, the rounding of that we have. So every year we are looking at our drainage program and how we're delivering our projects. And as been discussed in the previous presentation, we don't have a dedicated source of funding. And what we've been challenged with is just kind of how do we move forward and looking at also what has happened in recent times. And so This just shows some of the flooding that happened in the fall of summer to fall of 2014. A lot of our systems that we have existing got overtaxed because of the amount of rain and the magnitude of rains that we had. They were tremendous. They were in the 500 to 1,000 year storms across the city, in the southwest, the northeast, northwest areas. And so we continue to have challenges on how do we deliver and how do we protect the citizens of Phoenix and moving forward. What we found out through this process and what happened in that time frame is that we do have an issue with maintenance, and how do we make sure that we have maintenance of all of our systems, not only public systems but also private systems. There's a lot of private development HOAs that they oversee their maintenance. So how are we working with them as well to make sure that we have adequate and appropriate maintenance across the whole city? Looking at our unfunded program for the future, this number kind of keeps on growing. We're up to $1.75 billion, and you see here there's sorry for it didn't come out exactly there, but the major drainage infrastructure that we have is close to $600 million. That's the orange portion on the top there. The trunk lines is about $700 million that we're looking at. And then the small projects is the yellow portion of it. It's about $480 million. So collectively, all of that is about $1.75 million. And again, the challenge that we've had in the past, and we're going to go into the discussion about some of these funding sources, is that the last bond program that we have was in 2006, and prior to that was 2001. So we haven't seen a bond program that has provided dedicated funding for the storm sewer and flood mitigation aspects for the city. So looking at successes, what have we done in the past? This Camelback Road storm drain is actually on Camelback from 99th Avenue to 107th. It's in the west side area. It provides a tremendous amount of flood protection in that area. The Levine Area Conveyance Channel was actually a P3, a public-private partnership that we actually worked with the Flood Control District and also the property owners across the southwest area where this conveyance channel got built. It was roughly about, I think it was $20 million. We had 10 million, and then the district had another 10 million. Plus, in addition to that, all the land that was dedicated for this project. So kind of looking at those types of projects. Big projects, now we're looking at the smaller projects, some of the local drainage issues that we're having in the Arcadia neighborhood. If you can imagine the Arizona Canal, you have houses that front the back side of the north side of the canal. Well, there is a flood-prone area along there, and so these are the types of projects that we're continuously not only working within our staff and our the capabilities that we have, but also partnering with the district, the flood control district. Here's another one on the east side, the Carnation neighborhood. This is fairly on the east side of Phoenix. The same issue. I believe the Arizona Grand is on the east side, on the west side of this area, and so it's sort of a ponding area there. And so this was to provide just local drainage opportunities to alleviate that area of just some nuisance water. And as you can see, we've had some bad rains out there, and this is going to provide the improvements that we did is going to provide a level of protection for that neighborhood. As we've talked about in our capital improvement program, we're moving ahead with a major project, the 27th Avenue South Mountain Avenue Basin. It's under construction. That was a partnership, again, with the Flood Control District. It's close to $6.5 million. We're providing 30% of the cost share, and the Flood Control District is providing 70%. Those have been the traditional types of projects that we've been working with Flood Control District. Again, the challenge is how do we move forward with limited funding and resources that we have. Another very developing area is the Warehouse District. We do have one project, and actually I believe we have two projects in the area to look at what's happening in the Warehouse District just south of the downtown. Because of the area being very old, it's a very old area. I mean, there's very limited storm drainage capacity out there. And this is trying to address some of the economic development opportunities that are happening in the Warehouse District and trying to see how we can leverage flood control district funds with our funding, the limited resources that we have, to address some of the drainage problems that are happening just south of the downtown area. So looking into how we're going to deal with the funding, Kini is going to talk about some of the funding challenges that we have and opportunities that we have.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, going into the funding pieces of it, and some of this will be very familiar from what we just talked about in our previous presentation. We've historically relied on bonds, stormwater bonds, to be able to fund our infrastructure improvements. And those we've been able to leverage with our regional funding that we've been able to get from the flood control district as well. But obviously we haven't had a bond program since 2006. We have a little bit of money left over from the 2006 program. Capital construction funds, this is what we get from telecommunication companies using our right-of-way. And as Eileen noted in the previous presentation, we've gone more wireless, so these funds, our revenues from capital construction fund have declined about 5% per year. So we're down around $13-14 million a year that we have in that, and that's we're continuing to have to revise our projections on that because the revenues keep on going downward direction. Impact fees, we do able to do this in some of the North Phoenix areas and Southwest Phoenix areas where we have areas of high growth. So we do leverage our impact fees wherever we're able to, but obviously the amount of that's dependent upon development, and so a lot of the money that we get from the impact fees are not available to do some of the larger projects, but they are able to help us pay for some of those larger projects. HERF funds, the gas tax revenues that we have, obviously they have not been increased since the early 90s. And we have already talked about the state legislature actions on HERF, but the bigger issue when it comes to stormwater is the fact that we have to be able to use this for roadway purposes. So unless we're talking about an arterial storm drain, on a street storm drain that's kind of going on in conjunction with a street project, we're not able to use those revenues to tackle stormwater needs, infrastructure needs. Flood Control District, Maricopa County, their funding, like most public agencies, those funding has been going down over the last few years as well. But they recently had an increase in their levy that'll contribute about another $6 million of funding available to do stormwater projects. But every time we talk to them, they're always wanting to know what's our local match that we're going to come with them, because they're in the business of looking at about 50-50 local split between federal and regional and local monies. So we have to be able to come with those monies there as well.
Could you speak to where they were at the county flood control before the recession and after?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Gallego, they've progressed from up to about $73 million for their CIP, their capital improvement program, down to about $40 million. And what they did is about in the early 2000s, they started reducing their property levy tax towards the secondary property tax. So they were up to around 32 cents roughly, and they kind of went down all the way down to $13.92, so 13 cents and 92 cents. And so they've added 2 more cents to their levy, so they're up to $15.92. And so that's the additional $6 million that is now being accounted for in their new budgets that the flood control district is doing.
But at the rate they're going back to where they were, Marvin will be retired by the time they get there, although still Councilman Williams thinks advocated. But I mean, they really balanced their budget by cutting flood control.
And continuing on, we talked about a little bit about T2050, Transportation 2050, and much like the HERF funds, the Transportation 2050 is going to be focused on our transit corridors or high-capacity traffic corridors. So we were able, much like the restrictions on the gas tax, I mean, it's going to be arterial storm drains that go along with our major street projects are the kind of stormwater projects we'll be able to do with the T2050 funding source. Now, if we talk about focus just on the flood control district, we've been very successful with the small projects assistance program that they have annually. We just received word that we got 3 projects, and they're listed up there, that we're going to have funded. The one thing about that program, it's limited to $250,000 and for construction costs only. It's very difficult with our needs of $1.175 billion to be able to find projects that are meeting that threshold without having to throw in a huge amount of money for a local match, because typically we're going to overmatch that $250,000. But it's still a program that we can use to do some good localized drainage improvement solutions in there. And I would mention that if you look at a historical average of the last 20 years, we're about $10 million a year we're able to secure in funding from the flood control district. Obviously, with the reduction in the bond program, revenues have been coming in. We haven't been able to have the local funding to be able to match with the regional funding. So that $10 million, that average in the last recent years is not at $10 million, but over the last 20 years, we've gotten our share from the flood control district in our flood control projects. Now, if you look at funding options, and this is just some things we threw out as staff as being options out there if we're looking to help find some kind of dedicated source of funding to be able to tackle storm drain or stormwater infrastructure projects. The first one is if we look at our city services bill, for example, and this is we've already got water meter equivalency tables that are already included with some of our rates on the city services bill. But if you were to look at a simple $1.50 fee on a city services bill monthly, it could generate up to $12 million annually that we could then obviously look to leverage against regional monies that we might have available, and even federal monies, and I'll get into that in a slide a little later here about federal opportunities we may have as well. A little bit change in course is because you always look at some of the complaints about how you charge for stormwater, how you generate revenue for stormwater infrastructure is how is it fair, how is it equitable across different areas. Well, City of Surprise is one region, city and locally, here's looking at a stormwater impervious assessment, which basically looks at different properties and what types of impervious structures or pavement that they may have on those that they may have on the properties that contribute to stormwater outfall and capacity needs out there. So it but at the same time, it also looks at an average. Typically, it's looking at an average of residential areas, how much impervious structures they may have on that would contribute to stormwater needs, infrastructure needs. If you look at bonds, we have about $600,000 remaining in our 2006 stormwater program. We did a very good job in executing a lot of projects under that bond program, but obviously with the debt servicing commitments that we haven't been able to tackle that additional $600,000 there. And then if you look at if we were able to secure some kind of local funding source for stormwater infrastructure, what we could do quickly or what we could do to leverage that ongoing funding source to do some major infrastructure investments. And this just is a table that presents three options. And the way you read this is if you look at the $6 million, the $10 million, and the $12 million option, if you're looking at an annual debt servicing payment to be able to support going out for bonds or financing costs related to infrastructure for stormwater, you could accomplish $83 million, $138 million, and $165 million in infrastructure investments based on those annual, and that assumes about a 30-year bond. We worked out these numbers with the finance department to be able to make sure our assumptions were correct on this, but this just provides an example of what we might be looking at if we were to secure some local source to be able to do some infrastructure upfront infrastructure investments, excuse me. And then, as I mentioned, the federal part, and Councilwoman Gallego, to her credit, she's been great in making sure us as staff have been turning over every stone we can to find money wherever possible. So we had, late last year, we hosted a meeting with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and really talking about opportunities we might have available out there, working with the Corps and the federal government to be able to address some of the projects. And so we're still evaluating some opportunities there, but at the same time, whether you're talking about the regional level or the federal level, they're still looking for local match opportunities to be able to show local investment in those larger projects that the federal government may participate in. And this one is a dam. I wanted to just talk about this briefly because this was built in 1978. And this is something just to talk about some of the successes, to show some of the successes of what stormwater infrastructure does. You can see off on the right side there is residential development. And this dam that exists right there is protecting the ability to have private development, commercial, residential development in a lot of areas of our city, that not just this dam, but other dams that we have around. So this is what infrastructure can provide for us on the stormwater side. It protects development, allows development to occur, but obviously it requires investment as well, both in the infrastructure side and also the ongoing maintenance. So with that concludes our presentation.
Do we have questions, comments? Councilwoman?
Yeah, thank you so much for this sobering presentation. Not a lot of good news in this presentation, and it really is setting us back that we don't have a local funding source for flood control. We're not being as competitive for federal projects, and so we're not getting our fair share of federal tax dollars. It's been hard to hear Maricopa County Flood Control talk about their funding as just for maintenance, that they really don't have much for new projects. I mean, it's great that we have 3 small projects and wonderful news. Majority of them are not in District 8, but we all have a lot of needs that we can't address. It's those 700 projects that are on our waiting list are all real people who come to us looking for solutions and who are so disappointed when we say We really don't have the funding to address your problem. They're in every district in the city of Phoenix. Some people have been waiting for quite a long time. And people expect us to provide safe homes. Councilman Gates was very kind enough to visit one of my constituents' homes after a second flood in my first year in office. With the woman had a newborn baby who'd never had a safe place to live because the home had been flooded and gutted for the baby's entire life at that time. And these are real issues that we don't have a funding source. So I hope that we will step up. I hope the county will move towards their historic funding levels. It will be a real investment that will allow great projects to come throughout Maricopa County if we can move towards historic funding levels. And we'll still have a big gap even if we were to get back to historic funding levels. So this really is an important issue, and I think we need to think long and hard about how we need to fund these projects. It should not be a rounding error.
Councilman Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank Councilwoman Gallego for her leadership. She has really brought this issue to the fore for all of us, and I think that's great. Unfortunately, she was driven to that point by really, some, as you mentioned, Ray, 500 and 1,000-year floods. But the reality is those can happen anywhere in the city of Phoenix. Just unfortunately, they really hit District 8 hard in 2014. But, you know, I think there's no question this is a regional issue and there needs to be assistance from all levels. But, you know, I see this as called detention dam number 7. I mean, I think with Councilman Gallego's passion on this issue, maybe one of these dams should be named for her. I'm not sure what that process is. Don't want to create any controversy. But.
Lots of jokes will come out of that.
Uh-huh. Any other comments? Well, thank you. I know that this has been requested for quite a bit of time, and very thorough report, and we need to find some solutions. So I'm hoping that perhaps we can do some private public partnerships on streets, and that would slide some money over into this category in the future. So it's something we need to look for continually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Public Transit's capital program.
Councilwoman Williams, members of the subcommittee. Today we will provide our annual update on our capital improvement plan. I have with me Deputy Director Ken Kessler and Acting Deputy Director Megan Neal, who will be providing the presentation. Ken?
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually will start. Madam Chair, subcommittee members, the Transit CIP program includes 3 main areas. New construction acquisition. This is for new facilities to expand the transit system and enhance the current system, such as Desert Sky Transit Center, which just opened. Fleet expansion to meet expanded hours of operation and modernization of fleet for reliability and safety. And also renovation and replacement. This includes facility upgrades for state of good repair, up-to-date technologies extending the useful life of our existing facilities, and redesign of existing facilities, which is already underway, looking at vehicle ingress and egress, revenue and data collection needs, and certainly security needs. Our objectives are to spur economic development through transportation. We're also looking to progress and maintain transportation infrastructure to support regional mobility. Ensuring environmental sustainability through design and green construction. And we are trying to serve the target growth areas based on MAG data that we've received on population, employment, and connecting destinations. Upgrading transit system operations and communication technologies, all to ensure a safe, quality, and convenient service for our community. We currently have public meetings for community input at commission and boards. We also have open houses for all of our service changes. The Citizens Transportation Commission plays a very critical role in providing project priorities for Transportation 2050. They'll also be reviewing procurements and all of our service changes. Other communication vehicles are the MAG public meetings for federal projects, public input on the Transportation Improvement Program as well. Some of the challenges that we will be managing moving forward is certainly funding. Proposition 104, Transportation 2050, we will be constantly analyzing our actual and projected revenues, availability and utilization of federal grant funds, and certainly we will also be monitoring the FAST Act and are looking into that. There is a public transportation component. And the Regional Proposition 400 tax extension. Our involvement will also be very critical to developing a long-term plan for regional funding to succeed the current Prop 400, which does expire in 2025. Aging infrastructure is also a major challenge that we will be managing. We have multiple garages right now that are more than 30 years old, so we're looking to renovate those over the coming years. We have a large percentage of our fleet that is operating past expected lifespan, so replacement and new vehicles. Also, fair technology upgrades will be necessary to meet consumer expectations. So this is the reloadable smart cards and mobile apps and making those available to the public, as well as regional transit communication system upgrades. Specifically, our CAD AVL system, which is computer-aided dispatch automated vehicle locator system that improves communication between our operators, our dispatch, and real-time location information for service delivery. Oh, and then lastly, certainly Transportation 2050 plan implementation moving forward. All of these projects are integral to making that a success moving forward. It will be based on fiscal realities and public input. Our current fiscal year projects include South Central, project development in support of a future New Starts application to the FTA. 50th Street as well, that's the initiation of procurement for a design consultant and a construction manager at risk, anticipated in spring of this year. We also have the 302 building renovation, which is currently in plan review and will start construction this fiscal year. The Light Rail Northwest Extension Phase 1, which is wrapping up final construction and is opening for operations on March 19th. The South Transit Facility refurbishment, which is ongoing right now, currently under construction, and this includes delivery of compressed natural gas to the site. Our bus stop improvements, which is ongoing to include new shade as well as new shelters. The elevator refurbishment coincides with our lobby renovation for the 302 building that is currently going on, and then certainly the replacement of dial-a-ride and bus vehicles, as I said, of an aging fleet, and we are looking at 40-foot, 60-foot rapid and circulator replacements.
Maria, can I ask a question about the dial-a-ride? We're working at Valley Metro to merge with the Valley-wide system for dial-a-ride, so no longer will people be stopped at a border of a city and have to transfer. Does that mean we still have to pay for all the buses ourselves, or is there some advantage that RPTA will kick in some money?
So, Madam Chair, you bring up a really good question. Currently, what we're proposing, and we'll be bringing this to the subcommittee at a future date, along with our new dial-a-ride request for proposals. But what is being proposed is a combination, so allowing anybody who's to transfer from one city to another. That is about 7 to 8% of our total trips today. So we do not anticipate this will be a significant decrease in the utilization of our current vehicles, and really what it will allow us to do is provide, we believe it'll be better service all the way around for both of our folks in the city, as well as making those trips outside of the city. So to answer your question, what this really does is it doesn't bring new money to Phoenix. What it does is it keeps us from spending additional funds that can then be used to provide better service inside, as well as potentially technology improvements. Did that answer your question, Councilwoman?
Thank you.
For fiscal year 16-17, we will be moving forward with design on 59th Avenue Park and Ride and possible construction. This will coincide with the Loop 202 construction, and we'll be working with ADOT on that. 50th Street Light Rail Station final design and should begin construction on this station on 1617. And then the bus stop improvements for furniture shade and transit pads will also continue, as well as the 302 building improvements would wrap up construction activities on renovation in 2017. Ongoing bus and dial ride replacement vehicles will continue to take place, and we'll be replacing some of our aged 40-foot fleet with 60-foot buses to address some overcrowding issues. All right, and I'll kick it over to Ken.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm going to go over our broader, the 5-year CI program that we proposed, as well as getting into some of the numbers, some of the dollars and so forth. Also looking a little bit at the history of the Public Transit Department CIP budget. So first, I just want to highlight, and you see some common themes here in terms of vehicle replacement. Obviously, vehicles are a very large part of our overall capital asset program. And you'll see when we get to some charts, you'll see that shown visually how much that makes up of our overall program. So this just shows some of the numbers that in terms of what we'll be doing over the next 5 years in our CIP program. Again, fleet being big, ongoing bus stop improvements. We've heard and we know that shading more bus stops is important, and as part of the T2050 program, our goal is to shade every bus stop that we can possibly put a shade structure on. So that will be a big program.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've actually had my coffee chat this morning. I got a question. We always talk about shelters, but what about like paving the area where the bus stop is? Is that something that we're looking at as well as doing the shelters?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, yes, in terms of addressing the overall bus stops, it's not just the furniture and the shade, but it's also concrete pads and so forth, and meeting the ADA standards. And so that's part of the overall program, is then to upgrade eventually all those stops to ADA standards to make sure that we accommodate for that.
And Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, one of the other things that we're working very closely with the Street Transportation Department on is in areas where we don't have the improvements on one side of the street. So we don't have the sidewalks, which then has hampered our ability to put that shelter and improve it. That's one of the partnerships that will occur because of Transportation 2050, to allow us to ensure that we have the sidewalks, which then means we then can put in the shade structure.
Thank you.
And just lastly on this slide, technology, throughout our 5-year CIP, there are a number of technology upgrades. We have a number of transit-specific systems and applications that we will be upgrading and potentially replacing. And Megan mentioned the CAD AVL project that is in our program actually for this current fiscal year, and then also looking at potential upgrades or full system replacement for our fare collection system. So this chart here just shows, similar to what Street showed in their presentation, the history of our CIP, and you can see ours has changed much more dramatically, and really that's due to the initial light rail project. Those bigger bars to the left there were when the initial 20-mile light rail project was under construction. And a lot of that money was flowing through our budget in terms of our local commitment and local funding that went into that. And then you see it sort of tapered off after the completion of that project. And we're now kind of more consistently bouncing around between about $60 and $140 million per year. Obviously with some peaks and valleys depending on our particular capital needs. And a lot of the changes there really is driven by some facility needs that really change over time. Megan mentioned we have some aging facilities and we have done some renovations, and we have a renovation project underway right now. And as you look at next year, it drops off quite a bit, and that's primarily due to a very large number of fleet replacements that we have in our current CIP, and the number of replacements that are going to occur next year in 16-17 drops off to probably what we'll see as a more normal, hopefully consistent 40 to 50 buses and about 25 dowel rod vehicles each year.
Oh,
okay.
This worked at the other, when we tested it, we apologize for this.
Apologize for that.
So we can just fill in?
Sure, yeah. So
Sure.
Great.
I'll just explain what each of the pieces of the pie are. So the really big blue piece in the front there, that's our revenue fleet. So this is what we have in our proposed 16-17 CIP. As I mentioned before, revenue fleet is by and large the biggest consistent part of our CIP. The next piece to the left there, the orange, that's our passenger facilities. That makes up about 13% of our overall CIP next year. Then the next smaller piece there in the green is our what we call admin/maintenance facilities. That's our 302 building, the building we occupy, and some ongoing capital improvements we have at our maintenance facilities. And then the next piece of the pie there in the yellow is our technology improvements. Overall, it's not a very large, we have a number of smaller projects in terms of technology. The blue piece in the back there is actually our light rail program for next year, and most of what we have programmed in next year's CIP for light rail is the 50th Street Station. At the time we prepared the CIP, we hadn't yet had the conversation and the decisions on the moving of some of the schedules for the various light rail projects. So next year when we submit our CIP, it'll probably have some adjustments, but most of the light rail program will be in Valley Metro Rail's budget and some of it in our budget with local funds. And then the last piece of the pie there, the green, that's a other category catch-all. We have bus bays in there, and then we also have a pretty healthy size contingency built into the CIP next year, just because of some of the unknowns yet as we roll out and implement the T2050 program. We wanted to make sure we had enough budget authority there that as we worked with the Citizens Transportation Committee, this subcommittee and council, that we have budget authority if we want to accelerate some projects. This one did work. So this here shows the breakdown of the funding sources for the fiscal year 16-17 budget. And you can see there that federal funds make up nearly half. And this next year's actually kind of a low year for our federal funding. Usually the FTA funds make up well over half of our CIP. And then we also have regional funds, and then we have our new Transportation 2050 funds programmed at a little more than a third of our CIP next year. And then looking at the overall 5-year program, okay, I guess we got 4 out of 6 on this one. Again, this is the same categories in terms of our project types. So the big blue one there, revenue fleet, at well over half of our program. And then the breakdown of the other categories. And again, the yellow in the back there is technology. So over the 5 years, technology is a bigger part of our program. If you recall the previous slide, technology was only a couple % of next year's CIP, but in the future we've programmed for the potential replacement of the regional fare collection system, which is funded with regional and federal funds if we move forward to do that. And we are working with our regional partners right now to determine the future of the fare collection system, as Megan mentioned, to roll out some of the customer amenities with smart cards and mobile ticketing, as well as just looking at the system as it ages. Right now it's about 8 years old. The life on it is anywhere from 12 to 20 years, depending on how well it's maintained. And right now it's pretty well maintained in almost like new condition. So we'll be evaluating that with our regional partners and whether we move forward with just upgrades or whether we do a full system replacement and the timing of that. And then lastly here, this is the funding breakdown again of the 5-year CIP. And the big green piece there, that's actually represents 61% of the overall pie. So over the 5-year CIP, more representative of what we typically seen is the federal participation in our CIP is well over half. The front piece there is the regional funds, the Prop 400 funds. That there is about a 13% of our overall 5-year CIP. And then the Transportation 2050 funds there in the blue represents about a quarter of our 5-year CIP. So actually with the Transportation 2050, it's a little bit more of a bigger piece of the pie than the old Transit 2000 was of our CIP because of the increased funding level and our ability to deliver more projects with that fund source. And that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to entertain any more questions.
So, Madam Chair,
Questions?
members of the subcommittee, I want to apologize for these numbers. They did test out when we were testing it, so we do apologize for that, and we'll make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. The other piece that I wanted to emphasize here is that unlike most of the departments, when you see them bring forth their CIPs, the difference that we have in ours is because we are the designated recipient of federal funds and do provide the regional work that is done in many of these instances, you will see other agencies, meaning could be other cities, could be the Valley Metro funds that are included in our CIP. And that really is to show that, that we do provide that regional nature of handling large projects like our CAD AVL replacement, like our fare collection systems. You will see their numbers in there. We do make sure that we, even though we calculate them here, that we do get our fair share back from each one of those agencies so that Phoenix is only paying our fair share of these projects. And we look forward to your questions.
Councilwoman?
While we have that pie up there, we should note that in 45 states in the country, there would also be a slice for state shared, but we are one of the very few states that does not provide state funding for mass transit.
Correct.
So I understand that the Federal Transit Administration recently created a new rule which would allow local governments to give preference to local businesses in their procurement. So Los Angeles used this very effectively to get hundreds of jobs with a new bus manufacturer. It looks like we're going to be in a phase of heavy capital investment. Is that something we would consider, giving preference to people who build their products or source their products in some way in the Phoenix market?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, that is an excellent new approach that we're able to take. With the current procurements for instance, for our vehicles, we are currently in a 5-year agreement for those purchases, but it will be something that we can use in the future procurements. We've certainly done that in the past. So when we were building the initial 20 miles of the light rail, we were working very closely with the manufacturer to bring them here to do the testing and the final assembly. And those types of things we can now do even further and provide preference and prices. Before it was really just a negotiation, but with a preference and price, we certainly will be able to do that in the future, and we would like to discuss that with you further as we do, as we bring these requests for proposals to you in the future.
Wonderful. I think we're a very attractive market. The City of Phoenix voters have said we want to invest in this area, and I think all of us in the council are united in making sure they get their biggest bang for their buck.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it. Keep us posted. Howard May, did you want to, I'll go back and, okay. And then the next item is, I will go back for public comments. Did you want to say something there? No? Okay, thank you. Any future items, requests for agenda items? Okay, hearing none, we're adjourned.